kind or make of ultrasound machine do you recommend for a routine practice and intervention? And the same question, another form is that what is the minimum specs of ultrasound that a urologist should go for while buying a machine? And I would like to direct this to both Dr. Sabnis sir and Dr. Sapan sir.
Yeah, I will just answer before Dr. Sopan takes over that the machine for the interventional, if you want to have the most ideal machine, then for urological interventions, B&K is the most ideal. If you see all newer advances which are coming up, whether it is a contrast enhanced sonography, whether it's a drop down probe, all the advances in sonography, they have been tried on the B&K machine. And all over the world, B&K is the one which is meant for urological intervention. However, for the routine interventions, what we do, PCN access and PCN and other things, any machine whichever is available with you can be taken up. There is no problem. Minimum specification from the urology point of view is the one sector probe, which is a 3.5 or to 5 probe. And of course, one transrectal sonography probe, which quite often people combine with a transvaginal probe. So that should suffice, which will be most economical and the most useful specifications. Sopan, you want to add anything?
Yes, sir. There are two things we should consider when we are looking for an ultrasound machine. What is the kind of money we are willing to invest into the thing, and what is the kind of return on our investment which we are going to get vis-a-vis, and use it as a yield versus benefit sort of ratio which you want to do, and what kind of a practice you are looking at. For example, a typical urological practice, about 40% of your ultrasounds will be kidney, ureter, bladder region, and you'll need one sector probe, whether it is the convex probe or the modified convex probes, which are now available with a small footprint. Another about 35 to 40% will be your transrectal ultrasound, because it will be commonly done, because once you start showing dependency on the transrectal ultrasound, the number of ultrasounds will definitely increase. The third most common intervention, maybe about 15-16%, will be for your interventions itself. For example, ultrasound guided punctures and this thing. For that, it is better if you go for a small footprint probe, which are slightly more expensive, but they give you more sort of flexibility inside the operation theater when you can do that. And less than 2 to 5% of your practice will be formed by the robotic surgeons can use their robotic probes, but the Doppler is the forming only about 2 to 5%. Especially if you're doing a large amount of vascular access, then few cases you will be able to do. So I think when you buy an ultrasound machine, any machine these days is good enough. Let me be very, very frank and candid about it. BK has special software for urologists, and when you want to combine it with the MRI and all, so it's easier for them to combine. But all ultrasounds now are digital ultrasounds. It's basically a software which is written into the hardware, and that does the. You have seen those newer Bluetooth ultrasounds, which there's just a small probe and there is a Bluetooth connection with your telephone, and you can do a good ultrasound with that also. So the technology has stagnated to a point because of the digital enhancement, digital involvement. All companies are probably giving you the same kind of machines, but I would prefer you to go for a small footprint convex probe with a transrectal probe and a Doppler probe. This would probably take care of most of your indications which you are going to do.
Thank you, sir. So there's a question from Dr. Vineet Gauhar from Singapore, and I would like to ask this to Dr. Sabnis, sir. How do you identify anterior and posterior calyces on ultrasound in both prone and supine positions?
Yes, so I think this is a very important question, and many people have this. Many people have doubt about this. As I showed in my video presentation, that if you make a patient in a prone position, and if you start doing sonography come from medial to lateral side, the first calyx which you come across, keeping the kidney in the sagittal section, the first calyx which you come across is the group of a posterior calyces. So that is how you see the posterior calyces. If you move further laterally, then that will be the anterior calyx. Now, same can be done in the supine position. When you do supine position, you always give a little bit of a tilt. So when you do sonography, you have to come from the backward to the, or the medial to lateral, and the first calyces group is the posterior calyx. So this is how you identify, but this is for the normally situated kidneys. Quite often previously operated, quite often mal-rotated, quite often all these things definitely keep changing. But when you do sonography and move your probe here and there, the calyces which are more on the medial side or the posterior side, they are the ones which is the posterior calyces.
Thank you, sir. Let's skip this. Yeah. So there's a question from Dr. Rahul Yadav.
What we do is that when we do intra-operative open surgery transplantation, transplant or anything, then what we do is that we put in the rubber gloves, we put a lot of jelly, and in that we put a probe with no touch technique, and then you tie the glove over the probe, and that becomes completely sterile. Whereas that much is not required in endourology practice, so we just sterilize by the sterilium and a spirit, like what we do usually do it. So that is amrut for all of us. So we sterilize with sterilium.
Something I've seen the interventional radiologist and our anesthetist using. There's a special wipe which is coming now, sir. The antiseptic.
But you see, all the BNK probes are immersible probe.
Okay.
You can put them in Sidex. There is absolutely no problem. And in a critical case, in a transplant, if you have to do biopsy or if you have to do this, we immerse the probe because there we don't want any problem. So these are all immersible probes.
Okay. What is your thought about completely ultrasound guided puncture and dilatation? You did mention during the talk, but this is
yes. So that is what is being done by many people. We did it in 2-3 cases, but I feel it is too much to do completely on ultrasound, because sometimes you land up with problem. You don't know where the wire is going. You don't know where the stone, whether there is any residue of stone or not. Because what happens is that once you do nephroscopy, then after that, doing ultrasonography and getting proper images is not a good idea because of water interface. The clarity goes away. So I feel it is a little bit of too much to stress that it is totally ultrasound guided PCNL. Although we did 2 cases in a moderately dilated system, single stone like that, but I feel it should be done in a very selected cases. Otherwise, general the information that ultrasound guided PCNL is feasible is not a correct thing as of today now.
So we cannot take all the questions, so I'll just pick up a few, sir.
I have already answered in the chat.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I'll move on to the trust-related questions, sir. So one of the questions is, and you've answered that already partly, that can we use a TVS probe if trust probe is not available? Is there any disadvantage of the TVS probe?
Yeah, the TVS probe is basically a bigger trust probe, or you can put it the other way around. A trust probe is a smaller TVS probe, and yes, you can use it for a transrectal ultrasound. The only disadvantage is it is slightly thicker, so it might be slightly uncomfortable for the patient, but I have not faced any such problems. For the first about 7-8 years we did with a TVS probe before I could convince my management to buy me the BK, which was costing.
And as Swapan pointed out in his talk, TVS is a end firing probe. So if you want to do any
it's a monoplanar probe.
Side firing, the TVS does not. There's no question of TVS probe. That I think Swapan very rightly and elaborately pointed out in his talk.
Yeah, so I'd like to point out also that the TVS is a monoplanar probe, and yes, I would also say that there is not much difference between doing a biopsy with the end fire probe and with the biplanar probe, except the comfort level of the patient. Because of the end fire thing, you have to put the TVS probe in bit of a torque, and that might be uncomfortable to the patient. And yes, I would say some patients are not very tolerant of that, especially if you are doing the absolutely apex biopsies. But I wouldn't say, I haven't sort of commit that biplanar is completely or totally different experience. It's not.
So the next question is from Dr. Devi Prasad Tiwari. How certainly can we say that a hypoechoic area is cancerous during TRUS?
Okay, so a hypoechoic area located in the peripheral zone along with an elevated PSA is probably pathognomic of prostate cancer. There's more than 70% chance that will turn out to be a cancer. So you must go ahead and biopsy that.
So the zone is important.
Zone is the most
Zone
important.
where, yes.
It has to be in the peripheral zone.
Yes.
And it doesn't have to be a well circumscribed nodule. It has to be not a well circumscribed nodule.
Right. And the next question is related to same, that how do you identify zones in TRUS, by Dr. Aditya Sharma.
Okay, the zones in the TRUS, I think I showed a slide over there. There are 3 zones which, if you are looking at a normal prostate, it's quite easy to identify the central zone and the transition zone and the peripheral zone. In a normal prostate, there will be hardly any transition zone, and you'll probably find a homogeneity across the prostate, except around the periurethral region. You might see a hypoechoic central zone. It's when the prostate is in the middle phases, when it is not very huge, just about 30-40 grams. Thereon you'll be able to make, you can see the 3 zones clearly: the central zone, the transition zone, and the peripheral zone. If the prostate is very big, 70 grams, 80 grams, 60 grams, 100 grams, then the central zone as well as the transition zone are usually pushed into a very, very thin area. The peripheral zone and the transition zone is usually more hypoechoic as compared to the transition zone, and the central zone is usually isoechoic with the transition zone. So it's quite easy to identify, and it usually do it in the axial section, and I call it the bull horn appearance. It's like the head of a bull, and the horns, the curved horns, they are the peripheral zone, and between the curved horns is the transition zone.
We'll take this last question for the TRUS section. Any tips for TRUS biopsy of transitional zone or anterior zone if the MPMRA is suggestive of a PIRATES 3 or more than 3 lesion in that region with previous biopsy normal and PSA rising? And I would like to direct it to both Dr. Swapan sir and Dr. Rajiv Yadav, please.
So Rajiv, first you can answer if you're online.
Yeah, so Rahul, we showed one of the MRI where the tumor was clearly anterior. Transitional zone is not difficult because you have to just make up a map in your mind where you want to hit the needle. So when you are trying to identify a particular zone, as one of the questions asked by the participant, you have to have the theoretical knowledge. Now, as Dr. Sood told us earlier, that you have to know what you are looking at. So in the mind, you should have first the knowledge where transitional zone should be, where the tumor should be, look at the MRI, and then you can target that area. And if you have any doubt, you can take more than one sample, space a little separately, so that the chances of hitting the tumor is more. For anteriorly placed tumor, depending upon the size of the prostate, it is very important that you should know whether the throw of the needle will hit the tumor area or not. So in case the anterior-posterior gap is too much, the prostate is big, then you have to actually push the needle inside till the middle of the prostate before you actually fire the needle, so that you know certainly that when you fire the needle, the tip of the needle throw will traverse the suspected site of the tumor. So that's the very, very important aspect, and having an MRI information will definitely help you in hitting the area.
Okay, so I have got a couple of tips. The anterior zone biopsy is much more difficult transrectally ultrasound guided than it appears on the creatives which we forward you. So in this case, where you are suspecting, now there are 2 questions actually in this: how to biopsy the anterior zone, and second is whether to biopsy the PIRATES 3 or not, to do a rebiopsy or not. Well, I leave the second question for your own personal clinical judgment, but the anterior zone can be biopsied with the transperineal biopsy also. That's a great way of biopsying the anterior zone, and that gives more representative course of the anterior zone than the transrectal ultrasound guided, which I showed you earlier. The transition zone biopsy, especially if you have a large transition zone, then MPMRI is very suggestive to focus your biopsy in that particular area. Only 20% of the cancers are going to occur in the transition zone, and you'll take the same kind of a mapped biopsy, which you do for the peripheral zone, but you'll also go for the target biopsy from the MP-MRI suggestive area.
Rajiv, sir, you wanted to add?
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask you, Dr. Sood, regarding the perineal biopsy. So with the current gadget which you have, do you need a separate attachment to do a transperineal biopsy? If yes, how much it costs, and how to go about it if you cannot invest into that separate gadget, means the grid?
Okay, I couldn't hear you clearly, but I assume the question is about what is the kind of gadget you are using and how much does it cost and what is the cost of the biopsy.
For transperineal biopsy only.
Yeah, for the transperineal
Added
biopsy.
cost of acquiring the
Okay,
gadget.
so when I talked to BK a few years back, when I bought that attachment, that's a very nice attachment which fits onto the transrectal ultrasound probe. And when you put the probe inside, it sort of sits in the perineum. It has to be done in a lithotomy position, and there are multiple holes in the template which are there. There are 4x4 holes are there, 16 holes are there, from which you can put in the needle. The template itself is mobile over the transrectal ultrasound. It has to be done under, I do it under general anesthesia because I find it a more invasive biopsy as compared to the transrectal ultrasound guided biopsy. I'm not, some of the people are doing it under local anesthesia, but I do it under general anesthesia. Patient is more comfortable that way. At that time, I bought it with the package. They did not give me a separate price. But I think if I'm not wrong, the cost was somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 euro. At that time, they had asked for that biopsy attachment. But if you're buying a new machine, you can always ask them to sort of put it in the package. Of course, the cost of a biopsy for the patient, transperineal biopsy for the patient, is higher than the conventional biopsy. In our setup, the conventional biopsy is costing around 18,000 Indian rupees. And the transperineal biopsy would cost somewhere around 30,000 because of the general anesthesia and etc., which you need to take for this.
For the trust biopsy, do you prefer local anesthesia or?
For trust biopsy, always under local anesthesia. Very few cases go under general anesthesia. You are usually able to make out these cases when you do a PR, the anus is tight or they have some pathology in the anus like a fissure or something which prevents you inserting or it becomes a painful insertion of the probe, or the anxiety level is very high. That also can be decreased by sort of putting in xylocaine jelly into the anal canal and into the rectum, waiting for a few minutes and asking the patient to push outwards when you're inserting the probe. That opens up the anus and the probe usually goes inside. So maybe about 2 to 3% of the cases they go for general anesthesia, but mostly we do it under local anesthesia.
Yeah. So I have a question from both Dr. Sabnis and Dr. Sood. So when an institution or a practitioner buys an ultrasound machine, how to take care of the cost of the machine? And so when you do a procedure like a PCNL using an ultrasound, do you put some cost of use of ultrasound per patient? How do you make use of or monetize the ultrasound, I would say?
I will answer that first, and then Swapan can answer it. We have actually, ours is a 140 bedded hospital, but we have about 10 ultrasound machines, and these are all B&K machines, and they are all Doppler and everything. So if you calculate the cost of all ultrasound and to be transmitted to the patient, it is not going to be a viable option. And therefore, in our setup, the cost of ultrasound, cost of doing truss, and cost of all this is not transmitted to patients. They don't generally pay that much increase in the amount just because we are doing something under sonography control or something like that. And majority of this major investments is done by the donations. So ours is a trust hospital. So cost and all is not much transmitted to the patient. Part of that goes as a charity investment. But Swapan can give the idea, which he will, I think they calculate all the cost and everything.
Yes, I had presented a paper in the UCCon 2020 at Kochi this year. And we did an economic workup of how much a machine costs. So if you put the machine cost at around 30 lakhs, then the and you are doing, then the total cost of the machine, including personnel cost, including the rental for the space, including the consumables, including the comprehensive maintenance at 8%, usually works out to about 95,000. This is a top of the line machine, which is a 30 lakh machine, maybe from B&K and something. I think then the cost of running the machine is about 1 lakh rupees per month. And if you do only one case of ultrasound in a day, then by the end of the 30 months, your loan for the machine is paid back, and your all the costs are taken care of. So the machine essentially is running free of cost after 2.5 years. So adding an ultrasound to your practice makes a lot of sense. And that is what I suggest. It should become a part of your OPD armamentarium when you are doing just one case, whether you're doing a Doppler or an ultrasound KUB or a transrectal ultrasound or an intervention, whatever you are doing, one case per day. Usually it works out at, if you place the cost at the current cost in any commercial setup, which would be between 800 to 1,000 rupees for any of these investigations. So that would be
I think cost will vary as per the hospital which you are working in. For example, Sopan said 18,000 they charge for the trust biopsy. In our hospital, we charge 8,000 rupees, which includes even histopathology and everything.
Yes.
So it all actually varies from patient to patient. I mean,
and that there is a lot of turnover. For example, you did an ultrasound and you'll generate more cases for your other. There will be more positive clinical cases from the others.
Yes, sir. But as you said, it took 5 to 6 years, even in your setup, to convince the management. In a corporate setup, I can personally tell that it has not been very easy.
Yeah,
and we are using the Sonosite machine. Yes, sir. That is the another issue. And in states like Haryana and Punjab, it's a big issue.
It's a big issue. Yeah.
So let's move on to the questions for MP-MRI. So Rajiv sir, what is your take on MRI transfusion biopsy? When is it indicated and how much is the added cost of equipment?
Yeah. So transfusion biopsy will have very limited indications, and one has to carefully offer this. Even when we have a facility to do a MR fusion biopsy, it doesn't mean that we have to do MR fusion in every case. So very simple, if the disease is palpable, it means it's large enough, quite posterior. That is when you will be able to feel it with a clearly abnormal DRE. Then fusion biopsy will add nothing to the cold biopsy procedure other than increasing the cost. Now, when the best benefit of fusion biopsy will be when you are trying to do a biopsy where the rectal examination is normal, meaning thereby either the tumor is small or it is quite anteriorly sitting. Even in those circumstances, MRI transfusion biopsy can be done what we call as MR cognitive biopsy. So it is still a MR guided biopsy, but what you are doing is you are looking at the MRI. If it's a big tumor and you are pretty sure with your experience that you will be able to hit that area, the results of MR cognitive biopsy is as good as a machine guided MR fusion biopsy, but in experienced hands. If the tumor is small, anteriorly placed, especially if the patient has already undergone one negative biopsy, these are the best case scenario where you should be doing an MR transfusion biopsy. So in selected cases, it probably adds in most of the institutions roughly around 10 to 15,000 and maybe sometimes 20,000 depending upon institution to institution. So normally, in say, for example, a trust biopsy in a metro city is costing around 30,000. Fusion biopsy may cost around 45,000. One thing you have to understand, it does not include the cost of the MRI. So MRI is separate. And sometimes what happens is the patient has an MRI done outside, but when you try to fuse it with the machine in your institution, you find that the software is not compatible. So that results into repeating the MRI again, sometimes the whole MRI and sometimes just the part of the sequence. So that may also add to the cost of MRI transfusion biopsy. It is very important when you are trying to offer MRI transfusion biopsy. Say, for example, a referring urologist feel that the person will be best suited for MRI transfusion biopsy, I would suggest let the host institution where you are referring, let the MRI be done there so that there is no chance of wasting the cost of and futile MRI if it's done already.
You are
Otherwise,
suggesting that with very good quality of images, a cognitive biopsy is probably equally as good as.
and there is enough evidence
Yes.
regarding this where they have done what there are studies where the MRI fusion biopsy was done by a resident without knowing the MRI, just based upon the machine, and a cognitive MRI was done on the other half or maybe later on by the teacher or the expert, and the results were same.
Sapni sir, would you like to add anything on that?
Yeah, I think so, because we had the MRI fusion machine for the trial, and we not only found it not useful in most of the cases, but to learn, there is a lot of learning curve. Let me tell you, the MRI fusion biopsy, there's a lot of learning curve. It's not that easy. It takes too much time for you to adjust to the fuse these images, take the probe there with the robotic arm. It is very, very cumbersome. And only, as Dr. Rajiv pointed out, it is only selected few cases where there is a role of fusion biopsy. Otherwise, majority of the times you can get away with your routine and the cognitive biopsy.
So I have something to add.
Yes.
You know, the problem with the current MRI plus fusion biopsy machine, so in India it's the Artemis which is available, is that once you have made the setup and the patient is hooked onto that robotic arm, even a slightest movement of the patient will result into abnormal place of taking the biopsy. It means that your site of intended biopsy is changed because the patient has moved. I guess the machine from Philips, which is Euronav, has a different mechanism of co-registration. So there the convenience of freehand ultrasound trust biopsy along with a fusion biopsy is there, and the results is more likely to be better. But unfortunately, that machine is not being marketed in India right now. But many centers in US are doing with Euronav, and I personally feel that in future, the improvement in the machine or maybe the availability of that machine will make it much more comfortable and more precise. But right now, there's a lot more we expect from this machine. This is not one of the best machines.
So there's a question from Dr. Rahul Yadav, and he is asking, can a MPI-MRI help in avoiding biopsy in gray zone PSA elevations? If yes, then which are these case scenarios?
I think it's a very, very important question, and I wanted to tell to our fellow urologists that there is no rush to do a biopsy. I mean, most of the time what we see is that slight rise in PSA, and there may be hundreds of reasons why people are rushing for biopsy. But the fact is, scientifically, there is no rush to do the biopsy, especially in gray zone elevation of the PSA. If you have any doubt that the PSA has risen, but there may be other explanation for rising PSA, especially when the PSA is not very high, there is no harm in keeping these patients for observation. Ask him to come back after 3 to 6 months. Now, what is happening? The practicing urologists and all of us have faced this situation, have this fear that maybe the patient will not come back. This is one of the reasons why it's happening probably. But in the best interest of the patient as well as your credibility, in case of gray zone, if you have any doubt that the MRI is not very suspicious, because the MRI film or pictures which I showed are the classical normal MRI. And there will be situation where it will be classically abnormal MRI, but majority of our MRI images are Pirate 3, where obviously we are considering the biopsy. The Pirate 3 is a very, very wide range. Pirate 3 may be harboring just on the fence of Pirate 4 do the biopsy. There are Pirate 3 which are actually sitting on the fence of Pirate 2. And the radiologist has labeled it Pirate 3 because radiologist will have the notion that if the PSA is high, let the clinician take a decision. So this is very important for us clinician, because radiologist is sitting in a cabin, he has just limited information, but you have the complete information about the clinical case scenario. If you have any doubt that the patient's rising PSA has many other reasons, there is no harm in asking him to come back after 6 months, repeat PSA, and take a call. If you need to repeat MRI, do a plain MRI and compare with the previous one. It doesn't change that fast. So I would suggest in grade 1 elevation, clinical scenario is the most important guide rather than following black and white dictates.
There's a question from Dr. Praveen Lakhera, and he's asking, in a post-trust biopsy scenario, whether a contrast or a non-contrast MP-MRI will be more helpful.
Well, I could not make out post-trust biopsy scenario means there are two scenarios. One, we haven't done the MRI before, we have done a trust biopsy, and the biopsy is positive. Now, in this scenario where the biopsy is positive and we want to do MRI,
I think he wants to ask, when the biopsy has been done, it is negative, and MRI was not done before
okay.
the biopsy.
So still, let me explain. If the biopsy is positive, your purpose is for staging only. Now, in that situation, your local staging is less important, but you are interested in lymph node and maybe surrounding structures. You can still proceed with the MRI without waiting for that, confusion creating of 6 weeks duration. There's a lot of confusion around, and I think the confusion is further enhanced by many of us urologists, because there was this statement given that 6 weeks mandatorily you have to wait after the biopsy. It doesn't make a sense. It is to be conditional. It has to be, the statement has to be qualified according to different conditions. Like in this situation, you are just interested in lymph node, and there is no point in waiting for 6 weeks just to assess lymph nodes. Your biopsy is not going to affect the lymph node status. It can barely affect little bit about the chances for extracapsular spread, especially in the area where the hematoma has happened. Second is where the biopsy is negative and you have still a clinical suspicion, or you are investigating a rising PSA. Now, in this scenario also, the situation may vary. If it's a very small rise in PSA, like the grade 1, which Rahul just mentioned, and the rectal examination is normal, you have enough time. You can wait for 6 weeks minimum, you can wait for 3 months, you can wait for 6 months, depending upon the case scenario. On the contrary, if say the biopsy was done at some other place, it was negative, but the clinical suspicion is really high, like if the rectal examination shows a hard prostate, the PSA is really high. And I recently come across such a patient where the PSA was actually more than 200. Surprisingly, the biopsy was showing BPH, which actually didn't fit into the scenario. We did the MRI, and it clearly showed that it is a highly suspicious area, and we didn't wait. So it has to be clinical case scenario. Negative biopsy, low clinical suspicion, wait for at least 6 weeks, because the hematoma or hemorrhage in the parenchyma may interfere with the interpretation. But you should rather wait for 6 weeks to 3 months, no harm done. In other scenario where the clinical suspicion is still high, you can still go ahead without waiting.
I will add a little bit to this question, to the earlier scenario that you mentioned, that a MRI has not been done, a biopsy comes positive. So as a practitioner, what should be my next investigation of choice for staging? And I will extend this to Dr. Swagat also, whether it should be a MP-MRI or it should be a directly PSMA PET-CT for a diagnosed CO prostatum biopsy. Dr. Rajiv, can you hear me? I think this. So, Sabnis sir, if you can pick up.
So in a positive case, what actually you are interested in is to get the what exactly is the stage, which is not the local stage, but N and M. So depending on your the biopsy findings, I mean, what sort of a grade, what sort of a score it is, and depending on your level of PSA, what is that, you decide how well you want to investigate. If you want to really investigate, if you suspect that there could be micrometastasis, it is going to change your treatment, then the next choice of treatment is the PSMA PET-CT, because that will cover everything. It will not, there will not be necessity of lymph node evaluation, bone evaluation. Everything will be done by that. But if you think that PSA is very borderline, the grade group 1 or grade group 2, say 3+4, and PSA is say less than 10, then you are really not suspecting the metastasis. So you may just do CT scan for the lymph node evaluation, and then you can just go ahead with this. So depending on what exactly is your suspicion, you will go ahead with the metastatic workup. But if you are suspecting, PSA is one investigation which will cover everything.
I
Yes,
think
go ahead.
one of the problems which we need to address, especially after a double sextant biopsy, and then having wanting to assess the stage of the patient, is the capsular involvement, because that is going to tell you whether you can proceed with a radical prostatectomy or you may not like to proceed with a radical prostatectomy, and also regarding the seminal vesicle invasion. These are the two questions. And although there is now data and expertise in MRI has reached a point where many radiologists of metal, they are able to do a conventional MRI and they're able to tell you whether this is because of the track or whether this is because of a capsular invasion. They are able to tell you. But I think in cities like Jalandhar, where we are slightly in a grade 3 city, the radiological perhaps has not reached that point where I would advise an MRI immediately after the biopsy and say, okay, so we've got literature to support that we can do that. I would still wait for 3 to 4 weeks, let the edema settle, and then get an MRI. And in any case, what's the hurry? You're going to have to wait for the radical procedure anyway.
And basically, Tanuj, the one thing is that quite often the local, once you have a biopsy positive and on transrectal sonography grossly you know what exactly it is, then if you belong to a center where your primary treatment is the radical prostatectomy, then whether it is a T3A disease, T3B disease, I mean whether it is an extracapsular extension or whether it is a seminal vesicle, your treatment is going to be a radical prostatectomy. And therefore, in a situation like this, what you are interested is whether lymph nodes are positive or not, or whether metastasis is there or not, because that may change your treatment line. So in a situation like this, if your biopsy is clearly positive, and then what we are interested is that whether lymph nodes are there or not, or metastasis there. So we straight away go for PSMA PET. Grossly, what is the stage you get with the idea of on the DRE as well as in the transrectal sonography, which you have already done.
Dr. Dash, when we
Yes,
are
sir.
doing a PSMA PET
Yes, sir.
or whole body MRI for bone metastasis and soft tissue evaluation, or
Sir,
a bone scan and or a bone scan along with a combination study, either an MRI or a CT scan. What is your opinion regarding these studies? I mean, for example, in our center, in our tumor board, we would consider a whole body MRI equivalent to a PSMA PET as far as a detection of distant metastasis and bony metastasis are concerned. Are we right or are we wrong?
Sir, you are absolutely right. Whole body MRI is definitely, it's quite sensitive, but doing a whole body MRI is quite cumbersome, number one. Number two, most of the patient, they will not agree for it, number two. Number three, the cost factor is quite high as compared to a PSMA whole body scan. And there are things which may be missed on a size-based criteria only. There are small lesions which may be missed on a size-based criteria, but they may be metastatic, or for that matter, may be involved with the prostatic carcinoma, in which we do see the increased PSMA uptake. Otherwise, if a low grade, everything depends upon the histopathology of the mass. If it's a low grade tumor with a low Gleason score, PSA is low, then definitely you can obviate, you don't need to do a PSMA whole body scan. But in higher grade tumor with high PSA, high Gleason score, you are expecting a nodal or distant metastasis, then definitely addition of PSMA to a whole body CT or whole body. If you are also doing a whole body MRI, I mean whole body PET MRI, PSMA PET MRI will be more apt than only MRI. Because there will be lymph nodes, there will be small lymph nodes in the retroperitoneum, in pelvis, which may be non-specific, may be involved with the prostatic cancer. There is no way to know in an anatomical modality only. We need to see whether the PSMA uptake is there or not, whether that is active or not. So in nodal, at least in nodal stage, we have to, what in my opinion, I mean, addition of PSMA to a PET, a CT or MRI would fare better. That's my opinion, sir. And for bone cancer, bone scan actually it looks at only the bone. It doesn't look at the soft tissue, as you know. So bone scan has a role in carcinoma prostate. But when you are planning for a whole PSMA, PET-CT or MRI, then I think bone scan has no role in that scenario.
I agree.
So I have inputs regarding two comments which were made. One, let me first about the MRI versus PSMA PET scan, how we select the patient where we do a PSMA PET scan. So wherever we are doing surgery, I mean, we being surgeons, we are wherever we are doing surgery, we are getting MRI in all the patients, irrespective. It is usually a non-contrast MRI. Now, selectively, we also are getting PSMA PET more and more because most of our surgeries are in intermediate or high risk cases. And PSMA PET has definitely added information in terms of small metastasis in lymph nodes which were missed by MRI many times. So in high risk cases, PSMA PET scan, even if it shows a small foci of uptake in the lymph node drainage, we give it due importance and invariably it is positive. What was happening when only MRI was being done and PSMA PET was being not done in such case scenarios, these situations, it was falsely negative because those lymph nodes were probably missed, those were so small. And we know in many centers, they do limited lymph node sampling only. But just like the best utility of MRI in local staging is that when you know it better, you do it better. So with PSMA PET scan, especially in high risk cases, if there is a micrometastasis suspected, sometime even in presacral node, or sometime invariably in the internal islet, we specifically make it a point that we do a more extensive lymph node dissection and pick up that nodule which was lighting up on the PSMA PET scan. So another point which I wanted to make about, I got disconnected earlier, but then I was in the discussion where Dr. Sabnis was saying that if the centers are doing radical prostatectomy as a first line of intervention, then straight away do a PSMA PET scan and skip the MRI because TRUST has given you enough information. The point is that TRUST still is a observer dependent. I mean, you cannot have Dr. Sabnis available 24 hours a day doing ultrasound on each and every patient. Ultrasound, all said and done, is observer dependent. It is still far, far inferior about the soft tissue information compared to the MRI. Now, the reason why we still do MRI is I could not show some of the case scenarios where, based upon the MRI, we could clearly make out that the sphincter is involved. We could clearly make out the seminal vesical invasion is so much that the patient would 100% require adjuvant radiotherapy. In my view, what's the point of doing surgery in such cases? And what's the point in waiting for 6 weeks unnecessarily? If you can filter out these patients early enough, it's better to put them on hormonal treatment and make up their mind that you will be requiring radiotherapy after 6 weeks or 3 months. So doing an MRI early enough in selected case scenarios, most of the time, will help you take better decisions and faster decisions and take away the confusion and the agony of waiting for 6 weeks to 3 months unnecessarily.
Thank you. I think that will be another debate altogether if we get in. Thank you so much. So there are 3 questions from Dr. Himanshu Pandey to Dr. Swagat Dash, and I'll take one of these. Can PET-CT differentiate histopathological types of bladder cancer based on SUV or any other characteristics?
FDG PET-CT has no role in differentiating the various type of bladder cancer. It has absolutely no role. It cannot differentiate. It cannot differentiate.
One more question, if I can put to you. Is there any head-to-head comparison of MR angio and PET-CT in differentiation of a bland thrombus from a tumor thrombus? This is for RCC.
No, while I was preparing today's talk, I looked for all this data for MR angio and whole body PET-CT. I could not find much. But with MR angio, what I guess and what I have discussed with my radiology friends, in MR angio, differentiation of bland thrombus versus a malignant thrombus, sensitivity will be around 70 to 80%. However, the specificity is less. What the radiologists say, the specificity is less. But in PET-CT, if you are doing a FDG PET-CT or a PSMA, RCC in FDG PET-CT, then definitely the specificity is better than the MR angio. MR angio has less specificity.
Sabnis sir, would you like to add?
Yeah, I think so. It is what he's saying is true.
I'll take this as a long question from Rahul. PET-CT has very limited use in primary diagnosis and staging of all urological cancers. Can you enumerate few clinical scenarios in your practice or from literature where it is required for primary diagnosis and staging in urological cancers, including PSMA PET scan? So I think for primary diagnosis, if you can just say a few scenarios.
Sir, I'll start from RCC. See, in a RCC for primary diagnosis and staging, what conventionally is being done is a CT scan with CT renal angio. But while with FDG PET, we are doing a CT scan, a contrast enhanced CT scan. What I do in my center is I combine CT renal angio, CT urography, along with a whole body CT in a FDG PET CT. So
Your mic is once.
when I'm doing a pre-treatment staging for a RCC in FDG PET, then I give all the data that CT scan gives. That is the anatomy of the lesion, angiography of the lesion, CT urography to rule out any synchronous lesion, any uroteral pathology, and for that matter, the N staging and M staging also you will be getting. Then coming to bladder cancer, in carcinoma urinary bladder, also if you are doing the pre-treatment staging, you can have a fair idea. Again, it's all about the improvisation of CT protocol while we are doing a PET CT scan. The PET CT scan is not only the whole body PET and whole body CT and that's all. We do administer oral contrast, IV contrast. We do delayed dual point PET imaging in carcinoma urinary bladder because the urine is FDG avid. We empty the bladder with much hydration. We dilute the radioactive urine. Then we inject Lasix to empty the bladder. Then we ask the patient to hold the bladder so that the bladder will be filled with non-radioactive urine. So we can visualize the lesion more. So in my opinion, yes, I do agree that PET CT scan has not much role in the diagnosis at the staging stage of much of the urological cancer. But if we do change the CT protocol in most of the cases, we can do renal angiography, we can do CT urography, we do intervention with furosemide, then definitely PET CT can add value in most of the cancers.
Yeah, Rajiv sir.
Yes, sir.
1 second, Dr. Rajiv, you are on.
From the point of view of the DNB and residents who are attending this discussion, according to the guidelines, FDG PET is not part of the primary investigation in any of these cancers. In practice, we are using it. So I think from the point of view of the resident and DNB, take-home messages.
Very important to get that point across. Yeah.
Now, it is also right that it adds some information in usual practice, not in the form of just because we want to do PET scan, but as a baseline. Most of these cancers may have some indeterminate lesion in the chest because of the age, because of the pollution, so and so forth. And when we do somehow PET scan later on in the follow-up, it is very difficult to judge whether it was pre-existing or it has come up recently, because the PET scan in those situations will be done only with a suspicion of recurrence. So it adds a lot of confusion. So keeping a baseline PET scan may be of practical use, but from exam point of view, if a DNB and resident is asked this question, no use of PET scan as a primary investigation.
Thank you. Sabni sir.
That was a very important message which he gave. I think it was very, very relevant.
Yeah, that's very important. So we have come to the end of the question. And there were more questions. So I would request all the panelists to please answer those in the comment section. I apologize to people whose questions I could not take up. Sabni sir, can we have closing remarks from you?
Yeah, I think so. This was a wonderful session which you organized. This was need of an hour. And most of the aspects you touched properly. Those topics were properly distributed. I must put here that Dr. Rajiv Yadav's presentation was phenomenal. I mean, I enjoyed his too much. Unfortunately, there was not much time, but I would have loved to listen further to what his talk made. It was fantastic talk, and I'm sure those who have seen live, they must have enjoyed it. And those who are not watching it live, I think they will see as a recorded version, and I'm sure it is worth watching it again and again.
Yeah, so
And
we'll try to get some more time from Dr. Rajiv Yadav. And
thank you for such a wonderful idea which are coming out every day and every week. So many new ideas are coming up from. Where are you getting these ideas, and what is the secret of your these ideas of coming out with fantastic topics?
it is just a think tank of 4 people, sir, as you know.
Yes,
And with a lot of technical help from Dr. Rahul Yadav and
right.
Dr. Nitesh and Dr. Aditya.
Correct.
And
Correct.
so, and there are so many suggestions which come on the page itself. So we
Very nice. Very nice. Keep it up.
Very nice. Very well done, Tanuj. A great job.
thank you,
No
sir.
doubt.
Dr. Swagat, I hope you are pleasantly surprised by the radiological know-how of urologists in India.
Yes, yes, sir.
Well, thank you, Tanuj. I would say this is my first presentation on Zoom. In fact, this is my first Zoom meeting. My daughter is going on Zoom all the time for school, but this is my first Zoom meeting, and I really enjoyed it. And the most important is that this is the best way of connecting with residents. We always feel that it's very difficult for us in day-to-day life to connect with the residents, and we owe it to our residents and DNBs, which keep on pushing us to enhance our knowledge. And it is very important for us to share whatever we have learned. Otherwise, it will go to the grave with us. It doesn't make sense.
We are doing a lot of case discussions, like practical case discussions also on the page, and Dr. Sabnis has been helping us out quite a lot with that. And we would like to have you also and Swapan sir also
Yeah.
to with those classes.
Our-
Thank you so much for participation and taking out time.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, sir.